You ever fry a single piece of bologna in a dry skillet, put it on white bread, and call it supper? Your grandmother did. She did not apologize for it either. That was dinner on a Tuesday when the laundry ran late and the dog tracked mud through the kitchen, and nobody in that house had the energy to peel a potato. One meal on this countdown is nothing but a raw onion between two slices of bread, and she served it to a table full of children without blinking. And number 10 is breakfast food showing up at supper time, and your grandmother did not ask a single person at that table for permission. These were not lazy meals. These were the smartest dinners a tired woman ever made. Here are 25 lazy dinners grandmothers made when nobody felt like cooking. Number 25. Pimento cheese on crackers. Open the jar, spread it across a row of saltines, and call it done. In kitchens across the South, pimento cheese sat in the refrigerator the way ketchup did. Always there, never questioned. A grandmother who pulled it out at 6 in the evening was not admitting defeat. She was using the sharpest tool in her drawer. The cheese was tangy, the pimentos gave it color, and the crackers kept the whole thing from needing a plate if nobody felt like washing one. Some women made their own from a block of sharp cheddar, a jar of pimentos, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. Others bought it from the deli counter at the Piggly Wiggly because the day had already taken everything they had. Either way, it went from refrigerator to table in under a minute, and the family ate without complaint because they knew what that jar on the counter meant. Tonight, the kitchen was closed. Number 24. Fried Spam and eggs. Slice the Spam thin, lay it flat in a hot skillet, and let it crisp until the edges turn dark and slightly curled. Crack 2 eggs into the same pan and cook them however the house preferred. That was supper. The Spam came out salty and caramelized. The eggs stretched it into a full plate, and a piece of toast on the side soaked up whatever was left in the pan. In Hawaiian kitchens, this was standard fare any night of the week, and across the mainland it showed up in homes where the grocery run had not happened and nobody planned to make it happen before morning. The can sat in the pantry for months without going bad, which made it the last line of defense on nights when the refrigerator had given up before the family did. Before I go on, for the folks who have been cooking along with these old recipes and want them all gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a collection of recipes like the ones in this video, all in one book. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 23. Buttered noodles. Boil a pot of egg noodles, drain them, drop a pat of butter on top, and stir until the butter melted into every strand. Salt, pepper, and maybe a shake of garlic powder if someone felt ambitious. Children ate this without a single objection, and the woman who made it could do the whole thing without looking at the stove twice. The noodles went slippery and warm. The butter coated them in a way that turned plain pasta into something that tasted like someone had tried, even though the entire effort took less time than finding the car keys. In apartments and farmhouses alike, this was the meal that appeared when the answer to what is for dinner was a long silence, followed by the sound of water hitting a pot. Number 22. Canned salmon patties. Drain the can, pick out the bones if you cared to, mix the fish with a beaten egg and enough crushed crackers to hold it together, then shape it into flat rounds and fry them in a skillet with oil until both sides turned golden. The whole operation took about 10 minutes and used one bowl and one pan. In the 1950s and 1960s, canned salmon cost less than fresh fish and lasted on the shelf until someone needed it, which made it perfect for the nights when nothing else came together. The patties came out crispy on the outside and soft in the center, and a squirt of lemon juice or a spoonful of tartar sauce turned them into something that tasted deliberate. Grandmothers who fried these on a Wednesday night knew the secret that most cookbooks never printed. The best meals are the ones that forgive you for not planning ahead. Number 21. Cold plate supper. No stove, no oven, no skillet. Just a plate set out on the table with sliced lunch meat, a few slices of cheese, a handful of crackers, some pickle spears, and whatever fruit was sitting on the counter. In some houses it was called a snack plate. In others it was called a lazy supper. But the woman who set it on the table did not call it anything at all. She just put it down and sat down next to it. This was the dinner that happened on the hottest nights in July and August when turning on a burner felt like cruelty, or on evenings after a funeral or a long drive home from a hospital visit when cooking was the last thing on anyone's mind. Everything on the plate was ready to eat straight from the package. Nobody heated anything, nobody washed a pan, and everybody got fed. Nobody planned these suppers. That was the honest truth of it. The women who made them had spent the day working a counter or a desk or running after children or standing on their feet at a job that did not care how tired they were when 5 o'clock came. They came home and opened the refrigerator and made a decision in about 4 seconds. Not what sounds good, not what the family deserves, just what is fast and what will fill them up. These meals did not come from ambition. They came from the ordinary exhaustion of keeping a household alive when the world expected you to do it quietly, without complaint, and without anyone noticing what it cost you. Every family had a version of this night, and every family pretended it happened less often than it did. Number 20. Peanut butter crackers and canned soup. Saltine crackers spread thick with peanut butter alongside a bowl of whatever canned soup was sitting in the pantry. Chicken noodle, vegetable beef, cream of mushroom heated with water instead of milk because the milk was saved for morning cereal. The crackers crunched, the soup was hot, and together they filled you up just enough to get through the evening without feeling empty. This was not a dinner anyone bragged about or wrote on a recipe card, but it showed up on kitchen tables across the country more often than pot roast or meatloaf ever did. The peanut butter stuck to the roof of your mouth and the soup warmed you from the inside, and together they kept families fed on the nights when fed was the only thing that mattered. Number 19. Macaroni and tomatoes. Cook a pot of elbow macaroni, drain it, and stir in a can of stewed tomatoes with their juice. Add butter, salt, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. That was it. The whole dish came together in a single pot and tasted like something between a soup and a casserole depending on how much juice you left in. In Appalachian kitchens and across the rural South, macaroni and tomatoes showed up on the table so often it stopped being a recipe and became a reflex. The tomatoes broke down around the noodles and turned the whole pot pink, and the butter made the broth just rich enough to feel like someone had spent time on it. During the Depression, families stretched this with whatever was in the garden: a green pepper, a diced onion, a few leaves of basil if the plant by the back door had not given up yet. Church cookbooks from Virginia to Tennessee printed it under a dozen different names, but the dish was always the same pot of soft noodles swimming in sweet tomato broth. Women who served this did not apologize for it. They set the pot on the table with a ladle and let everyone serve themselves, and the pot was always empty before the conversation ran out. Some families ate it as a side dish next to fried pork chops. Others ate it alone with a piece of cornbread, and nobody at the table felt shortchanged. The leftovers thickened overnight in the refrigerator and came back the next day reheated in the same pot, and the second round held together better than the first because the noodles had soaked up every last drop of tomato. Number 18. Onion sandwich. Slice a raw white onion thick. Lay the rings between 2 slices of soft white bread spread with mayonnaise. Press the sandwich flat and eat it before you had time to reconsider. In the Midwest and parts of the South, this was a real meal on a real table, not a joke and not a dare. The bite of the raw onion cut through the fat of the mayonnaise, and the bread held it all together just long enough to finish. Grandmothers who served this knew what they were doing. The onion was sharp enough to wake up a palate that had lost interest in everything else in the kitchen, and the whole sandwich took less than a minute to assemble. On the hottest nights of summer, when the stove radiated heat into a house that already felt like a closed car, nobody was going to argue with a sandwich that required no cooking, no waiting, and no dishes beyond a butter knife and a cutting board. Number 17. Spaghetti with butter. Boil spaghetti, drain it, drop a generous pat of butter into the hot pot, toss it until every strand was coated, and sprinkle salt and pepper over the top. No sauce, no meat, no vegetables, just noodles and butter, and the quiet sound of a fork twirling against the bottom of a bowl. Some families grated a little Parmesan over it if a green canister of the powdered kind happened to be in the refrigerator door. Others added nothing at all. This was the dinner that proved a hot meal does not need to be complicated to feel like a meal. and grandmothers made it on nights when the pantry was bare and the clock had already won. The steam rising off that bowl smelled like nothing but warm starch, and somehow that was exactly enough. Number 16. Fried cornmeal mush. Cook cornmeal in salted water until it thickened into a heavy porridge, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it set in the refrigerator overnight. The next evening, slice it into thick rectangles and fry them in butter or bacon grease until the outside turned into a golden shell and the inside stayed soft and warm. Drizzle it with maple syrup or sorghum and eat it with your hands if the day had gone that far off the rails. In Pennsylvania, Dutch country, and across the Ohio Valley, fried mush was supper at least once a week during the cold months, and nobody considered it anything less than a proper meal. The cornmeal cost almost nothing, the frying took about 5 minutes per side, and the contrast between the crunchy crust and the creamy center made it taste like something that should have required more effort than it did. People talk about being tired now as if it is something the modern world invented, but the women who made these dinners carried a kind of exhaustion that did not even have a name yet. They worked a full day, came home, and immediately started working again. They did not have a programmable slow cooker or a freezer stacked with labeled meal prep containers. They had a skillet, a gas burner, and whatever the pantry held. The laziness in this list is not laziness at all. It is efficiency under pressure. It is a woman solving the same problem she solved yesterday and the day before with fewer resources and less patience each time. These dinners were never the ones she was proud of, but they were the ones that actually kept the family going. Number 15. Biscuits and sorghum. Pull a tray of biscuits out of the oven, split them open while they were still steaming, and pour dark sorghum molasses into the center of each one. The molasses pooled in the warm bread and soaked into the crumb, and the whole biscuit turned into something rich and sweet and heavy enough to count as supper. In the rural South and across the hill country, sorghum was as common in the kitchen as salt. Families grew the cane themselves or bought it from a neighbor who pressed it every fall. A jar of sorghum and a pan of biscuits meant supper on any night when the garden was done and the store was too far away to bother. The sweetness hit slow and deep, and children licked the spoon clean before asking if there was more. Number 14. Creamed eggs on toast. Hard-boil a few eggs, peel them, chop them roughly, and stir them into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Spoon the whole thing over toast and eat it hot. This was the dinner that showed up in farmhouse kitchens across the Midwest on nights when the hens had been generous and the grocery budget had not. The sauce was thick and peppered, the egg yolks crumbled into it and turned it pale yellow, and the toast underneath caught everything the spoon missed. In the 1940s and 1950s, home economics teachers across the country taught young women to make a proper white sauce before they taught them almost anything else, because a woman who could make a white sauce could turn nearly any leftover into a meal that looked intentional. Creamed eggs on toast was the proof of that theory. The eggs came from the yard, the butter and milk came from the icebox, and the flour sat in a canister that never ran empty because it was the last thing a household let itself go without. Some women added a handful of frozen peas to the sauce, which gave it color and made it feel more complete. Others stirred in a spoonful of mustard that sharpened the whole dish and kept it from tasting flat. In boarding houses and small-town diners, this same combination showed up on the lunch menu under the name goldenrod eggs, with the yolks pushed through a sieve and scattered across the top like bright crumbs. The presentation changed, but the bones of the dish stayed the same: butter, flour, milk, eggs, toast, and about 12 minutes of standing in one place. A grandmother who set this plate down did not explain herself. The plate explained everything. She had eggs, she had bread, and she had enough patience left to stand at the stove for the time it took the sauce to thicken. On a tired night, that was generosity enough. Number 13. Vienna sausages and crackers. Peel back the lid of that small can. Dump the little sausages onto a plate. Line up a sleeve of saltine crackers beside them and eat them cold. No cooking, no heating, no effort beyond pulling the tab. The sausages were soft and salty and packed in a broth that clung to your fingers, and the crackers gave them just enough crunch to feel like something more than a snack. The whole meal sat on a single plate and left nothing to wash but that plate and a fork. Working men ate these on lunch breaks in the field and at factory benches. But they showed up on supper tables too, on nights when the stove stayed cold because the woman who usually stood in front of it simply could not bring herself to turn it on. Number 12. Canned chili over saltines. Open the can, heat it in a pot for a few minutes, pour it into a bowl, and crumble a fistful of saltine crackers on top. The crackers soaked up the liquid at the edges while keeping a little crunch toward the center. A single can filled one person, and 2 cans handled a family without complaint. Add a slice of white bread on the side and you had a hot dinner on the table before anyone could suggest driving somewhere instead. In households where the grocery run had not happened and nobody intended to make it happen tonight, a can of chili and a sleeve of saltines was the unspoken agreement between exhaustion and hunger. The chili was thick and salty, and the crackers gave each spoonful just enough texture to make the bowl feel like more than it was. Number 11. Baked sweet potato with butter. Scrub a sweet potato, poke it with a fork, and put it in the oven until the skin wrinkled and the sugars inside started to leak out and caramelize on the baking sheet. Split it open, drop a knob of butter into the center, and let the heat do the rest. The flesh turned soft and almost candy sweet without a grain of added sugar, and the butter pooled in the crevices and mixed with the orange pulp into something that tasted richer than it had any right to. In rural kitchens from North Carolina to Mississippi, sweet potatoes grew in the yard and stored in the root cellar through winter, which meant they were always there when nothing else was. A woman who put one in the oven at 5 in the afternoon had a full meal waiting by 6 without lifting another finger. Some sprinkled cinnamon across the top. Others ate it plain with just the butter and a pinch of salt, which brought out the sweetness the way salt always does when you let it. The strange thing about these meals is that the women who made them did not think of them as real dinners at all. A real dinner had a meat, a starch, a vegetable, and something sweet at the end. A real dinner took an hour. A real dinner meant somebody cared enough to plan. But the truth was simpler than that. Showing up in that kitchen at 6 o'clock when your entire body wanted to sit down in a chair and close its eyes and doing something, anything, with whatever was left on the shelf, that was caring too. These lazy dinners were small, quiet acts of persistence that nobody talked about, nobody photographed, and nobody put in a cookbook. But they happened night after night in kitchens all over this country, and everyone got fed. Number 10. Pancakes for supper. Mix flour, an egg, milk, and a pinch of baking powder in a bowl. Pour batter onto a hot griddle and flip them when the bubbles formed on the surface. Butter and syrup on top. That was dinner. Children lost their minds over it because pancakes at supper time felt like the rules had been thrown out the window. But the woman standing at that griddle was not breaking rules. She was solving a problem. Pancake batter took 2 minutes to mix. The cakes cooked in about 3 minutes each, and the ingredients were things every kitchen already had. In homes across the country, breakfast for dinner happened far more often than anyone admitted. And it happened because the woman in charge of feeding everyone had decided that hot food on the table was more important than following the unwritten schedule of what belongs at which meal. Number 9. Leftover hash. Whatever sat in the refrigerator from the last 2 nights got chopped together and fried in a cast iron skillet. Sunday's roast, Monday's potatoes, half an onion, a few soft carrots, all of it diced and pressed flat into the hot pan until the bottom formed a dark, crackling crust. A fried egg went on top if there was one to spare, and the yolk ran into everything and turned the whole plate into something better than any of the original meals those leftovers came from. Nothing was measured. Nothing was followed from a card. The skillet decided the portion, and the refrigerator decided the ingredients, and between the two of them, supper appeared in about 12 minutes without anyone having to think. The crispy bottom was what everyone reached for first, and the last scraped bits from the pan were always the best bites of the night. Number 8. Fried apples and smoked sausage. Slice a ring of smoked sausage into thick rounds and brown them in a cast iron skillet until the edges split and the fat pooled across the bottom of the pan. Push the sausage to one side, Drop in peeled and sliced apples with a spoonful of butter and a shake of cinnamon, and let them cook in the drippings until they went soft and golden. The kitchen smelled like a smokehouse that somehow shared a wall with a pie cooling on a windowsill. In the Appalachian foothills and across the Ozarks, this combination showed up on weeknight tables from the first cold snap in October through the last hard frost in March. The sweetness of the apples pushed against the salt and smoke of the sausage, and the two flavors settled into each bite without either one winning. A grandmother who made this knew that a good skillet supper was just 2 or 3 ingredients that got along well in hot fat. The sausage arrived seasoned, the apples just needed heat, and together they filled a plate in 15 minutes with nothing wasted and nothing stored. Number 7. Red beans and rice. Soak a bag of dried red kidney beans overnight, then simmer them low and slow with an onion, a few cloves of garlic, a bay leaf, and whatever scrap of pork happened to be in the house. A ham bone, a few slices of salt pork, the end of a smoked sausage that nobody claimed. By the time the beans turned soft and the liquid cooked down into a thick, creamy gravy, the rice was done and the whole kitchen smelled like a Monday in New Orleans. That is because Monday was wash day, and red beans went on the stove in the morning because they did not need tending while a woman spent the day over a scrub board. The pot handled itself. The beans broke down and thickened on their own. The pork gave up its salt and smoke, and by evening the only work left was scooping a mound of white rice onto a plate and ladling the beans over the top. Families ate this every single week without getting tired of it, because the flavor shifted depending on what pork was available and how long the pot had been going. A grandmother who set this on the table was not making a sacrifice. She was using the oldest trick in her kitchen, a pot that cooked itself while she handled everything else the day demanded. Number 6. Rice and leftover gravy. White rice cooked in a pot, topped with whatever gravy was sitting in the refrigerator from a previous meal. Chicken gravy, beef gravy, tomato gravy saved from breakfast, it made no difference. The gravy had the flavor, the rice had the volume. Together they made a dinner that took about 15 minutes and used nothing that was not already in the kitchen. In Southern households, this meal was so common and so ordinary that it barely registered as a decision anyone consciously made. You cooked rice because rice was cheap and fast, and you poured gravy over it because the gravy was already there waiting to be used before it went bad. The rice stretched whatever was left of that gravy into a full serving, and the bowl hit the table hot and heavy enough that nobody asked what else was for dinner. Number 5. Fried egg over rice. 1 or 2 eggs fried in butter, laid on top of a bowl of hot white rice, seasoned with salt and a splash of soy sauce if you had a bottle in the cabinet, or just salt and pepper if you did not. The yolk broke across the rice and turned into its own sauce, coating every grain in something rich and golden. This was the dinner of night shift workers coming home after midnight, single mothers eating after the children were already asleep, and grandmothers who had spent the whole day doing things for everybody else and had nothing left for themselves. The egg took 2 minutes. The rice was already in the pot. Together, they made something warm and complete that asked almost nothing in return. Number 4. Canned ravioli. Open the can, pour it into a pot, heat it on the stove for a few minutes, and serve it in a bowl. Chef Boyardee sold millions of those cans across the country, and a fair number of them got opened on nights when the original plan for supper had already fallen apart by 5 o'clock. The ravioli was soft, the sauce was sweet, and the whole thing seemed engineered to be acceptable to every child who ever sat at a kitchen table. Grandmothers did not serve this with pride or ceremony. They served it with speed. The can opener did the work, the stove did the warming, and nobody at the table said a word of complaint because the food was hot and the wait had been short. On a night when cooking felt like more than anyone should be asked to do, a can of ravioli and a glass of cold milk was enough to call the whole matter settled. Number 3. Grits with butter. Boil water, stir in grits, cook for about 5 minutes, add a generous pat of butter and salt. Pour it into bowls and set them on the table. In the South, grits showed up at breakfast, lunch, and dinner without anybody drawing a line between them. On a lazy night, a bowl of hot buttered grits was supper all by itself. The grits swelled up thick and creamy in the pot, the butter melted into a slick that pooled on the surface, and the whole bowl radiated warmth in a way that made a tired kitchen feel a little less empty. Some families crumbled leftover bacon on top. Others ate them plain and let the butter do the talking. Either way, the bowl was empty in 5 minutes, and the stove was already cooling down. Number 2. Liverwurst on rye. Spread liverwurst thick across a slice of dark rye bread. Add a smear of yellow mustard and a few rings of raw onion, and press a second slice of bread on top. That sandwich required no cooking, no heating, and no imagination. The liverwurst was already seasoned, already spreadable, and already sitting in the refrigerator wrapped in its wax paper casing. German-American families and working-class households across the Midwest and the Northeast kept it in the meat drawer as a permanent resident. On nights when nobody wanted to stand at the stove, that tube of liverwurst came out and dinner was ready before the kitchen light finished flickering on. The flavor was rich and earthy and salty, and the mustard cut through it just enough to keep you reaching for another bite. Number 1. A pot of beans. Pinto beans, navy beans, Great Northerns. A pound of dried beans soaked overnight in a bowl of water, then cooked low and slow all day long with a quartered onion, a ham bone if you had one saved in the freezer, salt, and black pepper. By supper time, that pot had turned into something thick and rich and fragrant that would feed the entire family for 2 or 3 days running. This is number 1, not because it is the fanciest dinner on this list, but because it is the laziest one in the truest sense of the word. You did almost nothing. The beans did all the work. You soaked them, you lit the burner, you walked away, and 8 hours later, dinner was sitting on the stove waiting for you. Your grandmother did not call this lazy. She called it thinking ahead. But the reason that pot ended up on the stove so many nights was the same reason as every other meal on this countdown. She was tired, and she did not feel like standing at a counter chopping and measuring and watching a clock. So she let the beans handle it, and they never let her down. Bologna and egg scramble was the go-to dinner when breakfast never quite happened and lunch was already a blur. It started with slices of bologna, thick and pink and curled at the edges, hitting the hot pan with a sizzle. Grandma would brown them until they crisped at the edges, then crack in a few eggs and give it all a quick scramble. No measuring, no garnish, just protein and grease and flavor. Sometimes she would add a little shredded cheese if she had some, but it was not necessary. This was about getting food on the table without making it a project. The bologna gave the eggs a smoky, salty edge, and the eggs softened everything just enough to go down easy. Served in bowls, over toast, or straight from the skillet, no one ever walked away hungry. It was simple, dependable, and tasted a whole lot fancier than it had any right to. You could make it in 10 minutes, clean up in 5, and be done with the day before the sun went down. Some meals were special because they were rare. This one was special because it was always there. Cottage cheese and pineapple plates were the go-to for a light summer dinner when turning on the stove felt like punishment. You would scoop a generous mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, plop some pineapple rings or chunks right alongside, and maybe toss in a saltine cracker or two if you were feeling fancy. That was dinner. It sounds a little strange now, but back then it was right there in every old cookbook promising quick, budget-friendly meals that helped stretch the pantry and beat the heat. It was cold, creamy, and sweet. The kind of meal that made sure you stayed full without sweating over a hot skillet. For families trying to get by on tight paychecks, it was a lifesaver. And somehow, that odd combination of tangy cottage cheese and syrupy pineapple rings actually worked. It might not win any culinary awards today, but during those lean years, it was exactly the kind of practical magic you needed. Buttermilk cornbread baked in cast iron was the bread that appeared at every meal, made so often that Grandma's hands moved without thinking. She stirred cornmeal with buttermilk, added a beaten egg, a pinch of salt, a bit of baking soda, and just enough bacon grease to make it rich. The cast iron skillet sat heating in the oven, getting smoking hot before she poured in the batter, which sizzled dramatically against the greased surface. That hot skillet created the crispy bottom crust that distinguished real cornbread from the sweet, cakey versions made by people who didn't know better. The bread baked until golden on top, then was flipped onto a plate and cut into wedges still steaming. This cornbread was meant for crumbling into beans, soaking up pot liquor, spreading with butter while still warm. Every grandmother's cornbread tasted slightly different. Some added sugar despite tradition, others kept it pure. But all of them made it without measuring, their hands knowing exactly what the batter should look like. Spam and cabbage was the kind of meal that did not sound like much but got the job done, and then some. Grandma would slice the spam into thick chunks and toss it into a hot pan until the edges crisped and curled. Then came the shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the fat, softening in the salt, and soaking up every bit of flavor. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar if she felt like balancing things out. That was it. No special tools, no hard steps. But the kitchen always smelled like something better than it should have. The cabbage turned silky, the spam golden and caramelized. You could eat it on its own or pile it over mashed potatoes or rice if you had extra. For many, it was a depression holdover. For others, it was just what you made when payday was still a few days away. It was salty, hearty, and fast, the holy trinity of Grandma's weekday dinners. And for all the jokes people made about spam, no one left hungry. You might laugh at the idea now, but back then, this was dinner you could trust. Fried bologna and mashed potato bowls were what happened when leftovers met desperation, in the best way. Bologna was cheap, salty, and easy to fry up in a hot pan until the edges curled just right and got that crispy golden ring. Leftover mashed potatoes were scooped into a bowl, topped with the hot bologna, and if you were lucky, drowned in ketchup, gravy, or whatever sauce was hiding in the fridge. It was not about being fancy. This was survival food pulled straight from those old creased cookbooks every family tucked away in the kitchen drawer, the ones stained with coffee rings and margarine smudges. No one expected it to be restaurant-worthy, but that salty bite of bologna with creamy potatoes stuck to your ribs after a long, hard day. It filled you up fast and made use of whatever scraps were left from last night's dinner. When you only had 10 minutes and not a penny to spare, this meal was a lifesaver. Soup, beans, and cornbread was the Monday dinner that anchored countless rural weeks across Appalachia and the South. Grandma soaked dried pinto beans overnight, then simmered them all day with a ham bone saved from Sunday's dinner, letting the marrow and meat scraps infuse the broth with smoky richness. She added nothing but salt, pepper, and maybe an onion quartered and thrown in whole. The beans cooked until creamy, their liquid thickening into rich pot liquor prized as much as the beans themselves. Meanwhile, cornbread baked in a preheated cast iron skillet, its bottom forming a golden crust from the hot bacon grease coating the pan. The combination provided complete protein, stretching a single ham bone into meals for 8 or more. Grandma never timed anything. She knew the beans were done by their appearance, the cornbread ready by its smell. This meal required only patience and the accumulated wisdom of generations who survived on exactly this. Grilled cheese and pineapple sandwiches were one of Grandma's best-kept secrets, the kind of meal that made you raise an eyebrow right before you fell in love with it. It started like any grilled cheese, with slices of bread and whatever cheese was available. But right before the second slice went on, she would place a canned pineapple ring right in the middle of the sandwich. Then it all went into the skillet with butter hissing underneath. The cheese melted, the pineapple softened, the bread crisped to a golden crunch. The end result? A sandwich that was both savory and sweet, crispy and juicy. It was like dinner and dessert in one bite, and it somehow worked better than anyone expected. She made it on Fridays, or on days when the pantry was almost bare, but the craving for something different was strong. The smell of warm pineapple and browned butter filled the house and lingered even after the dishes were done. Kids loved it. Grown-ups pretended they did not, until they asked for seconds. It was quick, clever, and full of unexpected joy. Just like her. American chop suey with elbows and tomato sauce was how families made a one-pan dinner stretch across the whole table without breaking the bank. It started with ground beef browned in a skillet, elbow macaroni tossed right in, and a jar of tomato sauce poured over the top. Everything simmered together until the pasta was tender, the beef was cooked through, and the sauce thickened up. It took less than 10 minutes to pull together, and nobody left the table hungry. This meal came straight from the old cookbooks tucked away in kitchen drawers, the ones full of budget tricks and fast dinners for busy families. American chop suey was not fancy, but it was dependable, hot, and filling. The elbows caught just enough sauce, the beef added protein, and the whole thing fed a crowd without much effort. Families leaned on meals like this because they worked. They were fast, affordable, and made sure dinner still happened even when paychecks ran short. You could dress it up with a little cheese or keep it plain, but either way, it hit the spot. Funny how the simplest meals stick around the longest. Cornmeal mush and molasses was the breakfast that cost almost nothing but provided everything a body needed to face hard work. Grandma would boil water in a heavy pot, then slowly stream coarse cornmeal into the bubbling liquid while stirring constantly with a wooden spoon worn smooth from decades of use. The mixture had to cook slowly, requiring patience to prevent lumps or scorching. When it reached the right thickness, something only her hands knew, she spooned it steaming into bowls and drizzled thick blackstrap molasses over the top. The combination of corn's earthiness and molasses' mineral-rich sweetness created something that tasted like sustenance itself. Children ate it before school. Men ate it before dawn chores. The leftover mush was poured into loaf pans, chilled until firm, sliced, and fried in bacon grease for supper. Nothing was wasted. The dish demanded no recipe because the proportions lived in muscle memory, passed from grandmother to mother to daughter through watching, not reading. Sloppy Joes had already earned their place in the American kitchen by the time Grandma figured out how to make them faster. Instead of hamburger buns, she grabbed slices of toast, whatever white sandwich bread was left in the bread box. Ground beef got tossed into the skillet with a little onion, then drowned in a quick mix of ketchup, mustard, and a pinch of sugar if you had it. No special seasonings, no packets, no fuss. Once the mixture was bubbling, it got spooned right over the toast and served just like that, open-faced, hot, and ready to fall apart in your hands. That was half the fun. It dripped, it stained your fingers, and it always tasted better the messier it was. This was a dinner for families who were too tired to sit proper but still wanted to eat together. It was loud, quick, and honest. And even though it came from a time of tight belts and short patience, it tasted like something you might pay good money for at a diner today. That is the thing about Sloppy Joe toast. It always fed more than just your stomach. Ketchup fried rice was one of those odd shortcut dinners that turned pantry scraps into something hot and surprisingly satisfying. You started with cold leftover rice, tossed it in a hot skillet with chopped onions, and stirred in a few big spoonfuls of ketchup. That was it. If you had leftover meat like ham or chicken, you diced it up and threw it in too. It was tangy, salty, a little sweet, and filled you up fast when there was not much else in the fridge. This recipe showed up in old cookbooks from the 1950s through the 70s, a quirky little trick that stretched leftovers and made dinner happen in 10 minutes flat. It was not fancy, but it worked, especially for families juggling tight paychecks and even tighter grocery lists. You might not see ketchup fried rice on menus today, but back then, it was a practical fix for busy nights and bare pantries. It turned scraps into something warm, filling, and oddly comforting. Funny how the strangest combinations sometimes stick with us the longest. Cracklin' bread was cornbread elevated by the precious remnants of hog butchering when nothing from the animal went to waste. After rendering lard from pork fat, Grandma saved the crispy brown bits left behind, cracklings that tasted like concentrated pork flavor. She stirred them directly into cornbread batter made from cornmeal, buttermilk, and a little lard, creating something richer than plain cornbread could ever be. The cracklings softened slightly during baking, but kept enough chew to provide texture in every bite. Grandma knew exactly how many cracklings to add without measuring, adjusting for how much fat remained on them. This bread appeared only after hog killing, usually in late fall, making it a seasonal treasure that families anticipated all year. The technique required understanding pork fat, knowing when cracklings were ready, and trusting your eyes over any written measurement. It was knowledge that lived in doing, not reading, and it made ordinary cornbread extraordinary. Peanut butter and bacon sounds like a dare today, but to Grandma, it was just Tuesday lunch. This was a sandwich born in the tail end of the Great Depression and carried proudly into the next decade by people who knew how to stretch every ingredient. She would fry up strips of bacon until they crackled, drain them on the same paper towel she used all week, then lay them across a thick spread of peanut butter on white sandwich bread. That was it. No lettuce, no tomato, no fancy mayonnaise. Just salt, fat, protein, and speed. Kids loved the crunch. Grown-ups loved how it filled you up without burning through the grocery budget. And for something so strange-sounding, it just worked. The warmth of the bacon softened the peanut butter slightly, and the two came together like old friends who had nothing in common but always got along. Sometimes she would add a second slice of bread, but often it was open-faced and served cold. It was portable, practical, and surprisingly satisfying. And in homes where time was short and mouths were many, that counted for everything. You might laugh at it now, but one bite would probably bring it all back. Minute rice with canned chili and cheese was the dinner of champions. If your definition of champion was someone who worked 12 hours and still had to put food on the table. That old minute rice box was a lifeline back then, cooking up fluffy in just a few minutes. You dumped canned chili right over the top, shredded some cheddar if you had it, and dinner was done. Nobody expected it to be gourmet, but it filled you up, stuck to your ribs, and made sure you were ready for the next shift, the next chore, the next whatever life threw at you. The cookbooks from those days leaned hard on pantry meals like this because they worked. They were honest, quick dinners that kept you standing, even when life tried to knock you down. And hey, melted cheese makes everything better. Tomato gravy over biscuits was summer's answer to milk gravy, using the garden's overflow when fresh tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. Grandma would chop ripe tomatoes roughly, not measuring, just eyeing what the meal needed, then cook them down in bacon drippings until they broke apart into thick sauce. Sugar was added by the pinch to cut the acid, flour by the handful to thicken, salt and pepper by instinct alone. The gravy turned a beautiful sunset orange, chunky in some spots, smooth in others, depending entirely on how Grandma felt that morning. She spooned it hot over fresh buttermilk biscuits, the tomato juice soaking into the flaky layers. This dish appeared during tomato season only, when the garden produced faster than families could eat or preserve. There was no winter version, no substitute, just the brief window when homegrown tomatoes made this possible. The recipe died with the grandmothers who never wrote anything down, trusting their daughters would watch and remember. Quick tomato and rice soup was less of a recipe and more of a family habit. It started with canned tomato soup, the kind that came in a red and white can and waited patiently in your pantry for its moment. Instead of milk or water, Grandma would stir in leftover rice from the night before, just a scoop or two, enough to bulk it up and stretch it across the whole table. The rice gave it body, the soup gave it flavor, and together they made something more than the sum of their parts. It simmered on the stove while she folded laundry or paid bills at the kitchen table. It was the smell that told you dinner was ready, not the clock. No one complained that it was simple. In fact, that was the point. You could top it with cheese, swirl in a bit of cream, or eat it plain with saltines on the side. Whatever the case, it went down smooth, warmed you up fast, and made a long day feel less heavy. It might not win any ribbons, but it won over every empty stomach it ever met. One-pot macaroni and tomatoes was probably the easiest dinner anyone could pull together when the cupboards were running low. You boiled up elbow macaroni, dumped in a can of stewed tomatoes, added a pat of butter if you could spare it, and that was it. It came straight from those old Depression-era cookbooks, the ones stained with years of spills and handwritten notes. This was survival food, plain and simple, but it never pretended to be more. The tomatoes gave just enough sweetness to balance the salty pasta water, and that sprinkle of black pepper over the top made it feel complete. Families leaned on meals like this because they stretched what little you had, and you could serve every last person at the table without wondering how you were going to afford groceries next week. It was quick, hot, and filled you up when you needed it most. The old cookbooks called it economical, but for most folks, it was just Tuesday night. Funny how something so simple stuck around for generations. Fried cabbage with bacon was the simple side dish that could become a meal when paired with cornbread on lean nights. Grandma would chop a head of cabbage into rough wedges, not precise, just working, while bacon sizzled in a deep skillet. She removed the crispy bacon, then added the cabbage directly to the hot grease, letting it sizzle and wilt down into something sweet and slightly charred. The cabbage cooked until some pieces turned golden brown while others stayed pale green, creating texture variations that made each bite interesting. Crumbled bacon went back in at the end along with salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar for brightness. The dish cost almost nothing. Cabbage was cheap and kept well in root cellars. Bacon was rendered from home-raised hogs. But it tasted rich, satisfying, and absolutely right alongside beans or potatoes. Grandma never measured anything, adjusting by sight and taste, knowing exactly when the cabbage had reached that perfect point between raw and overcooked. Creamed peas on buttered toast was one of those meals that whispered instead of shouted. It never tried to impress anyone. It was made for quiet nights, empty fridges, and long weeks. Grandma would melt a little butter in a pan, add canned peas, sometimes drained, sometimes not, and stir in milk and a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken it. Salt, pepper, maybe a dash of sugar if the peas were too sharp. Then she would ladle the warm, creamy mix over thick slices of buttered toast. It was soft, it was mild, it was the edible version of a warm blanket. Nobody bragged about it, and no one ever asked for seconds out loud, but the plate was always clean by the end. It was a meal that held your hand, quietly filled you up, and gave you the strength to keep going. In some homes, it was the only hot food all week, and even if you had fancier ingredients or a longer grocery list, you still came back to this because it made you feel like a kid again. Just peas and bread and thyme. That was more than enough. Sautéed canned corn and scrambled eggs was the kind of meal you whipped up when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted dinner to taste halfway decent. It came together in 10 minutes flat. You drained a can of sweet corn, tossed it in a skillet with butter, and let it sizzle until the kernels softened and browned just a little around the edges. Then you cracked in a few eggs, scrambled them together, and dinner was done before anyone could ask what was cooking. Old cookbooks loved recipes like this because they were fast, cheap, and practical. You could eat it plain or sprinkle on some salt and pepper to dress it up. The sweetness of the corn with the soft, buttery eggs made a surprisingly good combination. It was filling enough to pass for dinner, but easy enough to feel like you barely lifted a finger. These were the meals that stretched the grocery budget, kept families full, and made sure nobody went to bed hungry. It might not have been fancy, but back then, fancy was never the goal. Getting by was. Fried salt pork and milk gravy was the morning-to-night staple that sustained farming families through endless days of labor. Grandma would slice thick pieces of cured pork belly, fry them slowly in cast iron until the edges curled crispy and the fat rendered into liquid gold. The meat was set aside while she worked magic with that hot grease, whisking in flour until it turned golden brown, then pouring in fresh milk from the morning's milking. She stirred constantly until the gravy thickened into something creamy and rich, seasoned with nothing but pepper and instinct. This gravy was ladled over biscuits at breakfast, potatoes at dinner, cornbread at supper. The salt pork provided protein and fat that kept bodies warm through hay, baling, and tobacco cutting. It was never fancy, but it was filling and made entirely from ingredients the farm provided. The skill was in knowing exactly when the flour had cooked enough, when the gravy had reached perfect consistency. Knowledge that lived only in a grandmother's hands. American Goulash Light was less of a recipe and more of a formula. Meat, pasta, and tomatoes in whatever shape you could get. Elbow macaroni was the go-to because it cooked fast and filled up the pot. Grandma would brown a little ground beef, drain off the grease, and toss it with stewed tomatoes straight from the can. No sauce, no simmering, no drama. Sometimes she added a bit of onion or garlic salt, but usually it was just whatever she had on hand. The pasta would soak up the tomato juice until it was soft and tangy, and the beef added just enough flavor to make it stick to your ribs. Served in bowls with a sprinkle of grated cheese, if you were lucky, it was dinner. Fast. It was not the baked casserole version you see in magazines. This was goulash stripped down to its bones, made for people who needed food on the table in 10 minutes or less. And the best part? It was good. Really good. No breadcrumbs, no baking dish, no long prep. Just one skillet, one spoon, and a whole lot of knowing what mattered. That is how Grandma cooked. Campbell's mushroom soup over toast was one of those forgotten Depression-era dinners that somehow made a quiet comeback in old cookbooks from the 1940s through the 70s. It was as simple as it sounds, but it filled your belly fast. You opened a can of creamy mushroom soup, heated it up in a pot, and spooned it over slices of buttered toast. That was dinner. It did not pretend to be anything fancy, but when the cupboards were almost empty and the clock was ticking, it got the job done. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and time was short. It turned one can of soup into a warm, filling meal that stretched across the table. Maybe you sprinkled some black pepper on top, maybe a little dried parsley, but most folks kept it plain. It soaked into the bread, made the whole kitchen smell like home, and filled you up after a long day. Those old cookbooks were full of meals like this, simple recipes that felt comforting without much effort. Funny how the humblest dinners tend to stick around the longest, even when everything else changes. Leather breeches and fatback was a winter survival dish that turned summer's green bean abundance into cold weather sustenance. Grandma would string fresh green beans on heavy thread during peak harvest, creating long garlands that hung from kitchen rafters to dry for weeks. By winter, these shriveled brown strips rattled like old leather when touched, giving them their peculiar name. To prepare them, she soaked handfuls overnight, then simmered them for hours with salted fatback that slowly melted its richness into the pot. The beans softened into something entirely different from fresh ones, chewy, concentrated, with a deep, earthy flavor that no canned vegetable could match. This dish required no measuring, just the knowledge of how much water to add and when the beans had reached the right tenderness. Families relied on leather breeches when snow-covered gardens, and fresh vegetables existed only in memory. It was peasant food that tasted like Providence, requiring only patience and the accumulated wisdom of generations. Ham and applesauce might sound fancy today, but back in the day it was just something Grandma could throw together before the table was even set. Sliced ham went straight into a hot skillet, sometimes with just a dab of butter or the leftover fat from breakfast. A quick sear on each side was all it needed. Meanwhile, the applesauce, homemade if you had a backyard tree, canned if you were in a hurry, was warming on the back burner. This was dinner you could smell from the front porch. The saltiness of the ham played off the soft, tart sweetness of the apples in a way that felt balanced, simple, and oddly comforting. It was a meal for days when you were tired, when groceries were thin, or when you just needed something that felt familiar. And the best part? No oven, no long wait, just a skillet, a spoon, and a little heat. Folks might not talk about ham and applesauce as a main course anymore, but for a generation raised on wartime thrift and flavor that did not waste time, this was a weeknight miracle. If you ever needed proof that sweet and salty go hand in hand, here it is. Baked bean and Frankfurter cups were one of those dinners that showed up when parents needed something fast, cheap, and guaranteed to make the kids smile. You sliced up hot dogs, stirred them into a bubbling pot of canned baked beans, and let the whole thing simmer together until it smelled good enough to fool everyone into thinking dinner took effort. You could scoop it into bowls or coffee mugs, hand everyone a spoon, and dinner was done before anyone had the chance to complain. This recipe came straight from those old community cookbooks and church bulletins, the ones filled with quick fixes and budget meals for families running on empty. It was salty, sweet, and hearty enough to stick to your ribs after a long day of work or school. Those beans and franks might not have been gourmet, but they filled the kitchen with warmth, and for 10 minutes of effort, that was a win. You would see this recipe clipped onto fridge doors or scribbled on index cards, passed down because it worked. It was comforting, cheap, and faster than takeout. A classic for busy homes making the best of what the pantry had left. Poke salad with eggs was the dangerous spring tonic that required knowledge passed only through careful teaching. Pokeweed grew wild along fence rows, its young shoots emerging as the first spring greens when bodies starved for fresh vitamins after winter. But poke was poisonous if prepared wrong. Grandma knew to pick only the youngest shoots, boil them in at least 2 changes of water to remove toxins, then drain and fry them in bacon grease. She scrambled eggs directly into the cooked greens, the yolks enriching what would otherwise be bitter and medicinal. No cookbook ever included proper poke preparation because the knowledge was too dangerous for inexperienced readers. You had to learn which plants were young enough, how many water changes were truly necessary, when the greens were safe. This dish represented the ultimate grandmother knowledge, survival wisdom that could feed you or kill you depending on expertise that existed only in the hands of those who learned it young. Cheesy macaroni and egg scramble was one of those late-night meals that turned into a weeknight tradition. It started when there was leftover macaroni in the fridge, plain, boiled, and sitting cold in a bowl. Grandma would crack in some eggs, sprinkle a handful of shredded cheese, and toss it all into a buttered skillet. The eggs cooked fast, clinging to the pasta like a soft coat, while the cheese melted into every corner. A quick stir here, a little salt there, and dinner was done before the plates were even on the table. It looked like a mess. It tasted like magic. The noodles gave the scramble some bite, and the eggs made it feel like more than just leftovers. If there was ham or hot dog slices in the fridge, they got tossed in too. It was warm, filling, and cheap. 3 things every dinner needed to be. Nobody asked for it in a restaurant, but everyone remembered it once they moved out and had to make their own meals. That is the power of recipes like this. They live in your muscle memory, even when the recipe card is long gone. Pimento cheese sandwich melts were one of those quick, bold dinners that came straight from old cookbooks packed with practical, no-nonsense recipes. You took slices of bread, spread them thick with creamy, tangy pimento cheese, and grilled them in a skillet until the outside was golden and crisp. It was not just a sandwich. It was a fast, hot meal with big flavor that came together in 10 minutes or less. Pimento cheese was everywhere back then, especially in southern kitchens, but families all over used it to stretch groceries and add some punch to an otherwise plain dinner. You could eat the melt with pickles on the side or a handful of chips if you had them, but most folks kept it simple. The creamy cheese, the sharp bite of pimentos, the crunchy bread, it all worked together to make a dinner that felt filling without taking much effort. These meals showed up again and again in faded cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because they did exactly what they needed to: feed everyone fast. Funny how the boldest flavors came from the simplest tricks. Squirrel and gravy was the hunter's reward that turned small game into sustenance when store-bought meat was a luxury. Grandpa would bring home squirrels cleaned and ready, and Grandma would cut them into pieces, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them slowly in lard until golden brown and tender. The meat was removed while she made gravy in the same skillet, stirring flour into the drippings and adding milk until it thickened into something rich with wild flavor. Squirrel meat was darker than chicken, slightly gamey, but absolutely delicious when prepared by hands that knew what they were doing. The gravy stretched the meal, ladled over biscuits and rice to feed a family from just 2 or 3 small animals. This dish appeared throughout fall and winter when squirrels were fat and plentiful in the hickory groves. No recipe existed because none was needed. Country women knew how to fry meat and make gravy the way they knew how to breathe. It was survival cooking elevated to something genuinely delicious. Cold dinners had a way of sneaking into the rotation, especially during sticky summers or long days when even boiling water felt like a chore. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were Grandma's way of keeping things simple but still making it look like she tried. She would scoop a big spoonful of cottage cheese onto a plate, nestle a golden peach half beside it, and top the whole thing with a maraschino cherry if she was feeling fancy. Some people used lettuce as a bed. Others just reached for a fork and got to work. It was creamy, sweet, and oddly refreshing, the kind of combination you only appreciate once you grow up and remember it out of nowhere. The peaches added just enough syrupy sunshine, and the cottage cheese made sure you did not go to bed hungry. It was also what she served when she wanted to eat light but still feed the whole house. This was not a dinner that tried to win over picky eaters. It was a dinner that said, "This is what we have, and it will do just fine." And somehow, it did. Not every meal needed heat or noise. Some just needed quiet. Canned chicken hash was how you made a hot, filling dinner happen when all you had was pantry scraps and a few minutes to spare. You popped open a can of shredded chicken, fried it in a skillet with some chopped onions, and tossed in leftover mashed potatoes or canned potatoes if you had them. Everything crisped up around the edges, browned in the pan, and came together into something that looked decent and filled your stomach fast. Old cookbooks leaned hard on meals like this because they were cheap, quick, and made sure nothing went to waste. Chicken hash might not sound glamorous, but in homes where leftovers were gold, it was a lifesaver. You could top it with a fried egg or spoon a little gravy over it if you were lucky, but most folks ate it just as it was, hot, salty, and good enough to count. This was dinner that made the best of what you had, and back in those days, that meant everything. Funny how meals like this stuck around even when fancier options showed up. Sometimes the fast, familiar ones were the best. Wilted lettuce with hot bacon dressing transformed garden greens into something entirely different from cold salad. Grandma would fry thick-cut bacon until crispy, then remove it and pour a splash of cider vinegar into the sizzling hot grease. The mixture would pop and sputter dangerously, filling the kitchen with sharp, smoky fragrance. She added a pinch of sugar by feel, stirred quickly, then poured the hot dressing over a bowl of tender leaf lettuce just picked from the garden. The leaves wilted immediately, becoming silky and infused with bacon flavor while still retaining some fresh crunch. The crumbled bacon was scattered on top, sometimes with sliced, hard-boiled eggs. This dish existed only in spring when lettuce was young and tender, before summer heat turned it bitter. Grandma made it entirely by instinct. How much vinegar depended on how tart she wanted it, how much sugar on the lettuce's bitterness that day. The salad was eaten immediately while still warm, a fleeting pleasure that couldn't be saved. This one came straight out of the open the pantry and hope for a miracle school of cooking. Scrambled eggs with canned chili was never in any cookbook, but it made it onto plates across America faster than most 5-ingredient dinners. Grandma would beat a few eggs with whatever milk she had left, toss them in a skillet, and stir them just until they were barely set. Then came the chili, straight from the can, full of beans and spice and a little bit of mystery meat. It would warm right on top of the eggs until the kitchen smelled like a diner on a slow afternoon. A few slices of toast on the side, maybe a wedge of cheese if you were lucky, and you had yourself a meal. It was hearty, messy, and completely satisfying. No one asked what brand the chili was or whether the eggs were farm fresh. What mattered was that it was hot, filling, and on the table in 10 minutes. It was meals like this that made it possible to get through the rest of the week. And once you have eaten it once, you will understand why it never needed a recipe. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was one of those meals that showed up when time was short and the cupboards looked bare. You sliced up those hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and let them simmer in a can of creamed corn until everything bubbled together. It sounds a little ridiculous now, but back then, it was comfort food at its most practical. This was not a recipe out of some fancy magazine. It came straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that every kitchen drawer seemed to have. Families on tight budgets loved it because it made use of pantry staples, and somehow, that sweet corn and salty hot dog combination worked. You could dress it up with black pepper or a little hot sauce, but most folks kept it plain. After a long day, this dinner showed up in 10 minutes flat, filling your belly even if your wallet felt empty. Funny how those quick meals stick with you long after the hard times pass. Fried pork chops and sawmill gravy was the meal that stretched 2 chops into dinner for 6 when money was tight but appetites were large. Grandma would pound the chops thin, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in lard until the coating turned crispy and the meat cooked through. The chops were set aside while she worked the pan drippings into gravy, adding flour and stirring until it browned, then pouring in milk slowly while scraping up all the flavorful bits stuck to the iron. The gravy thickened into something creamy and rich, flecked with brown bits of fried coating, poured over everything on the plate. Biscuits soaked it up, potatoes swam in it, and the pork chops got a final drench before eating. This was the meal that taught children to fill up on gravy and bread so the meat could stretch further. Grandma knew exactly how thick to make the gravy, how much milk to add, when to stop stirring, all without measuring a single ingredient. Before we had Taco Tuesday, there were taco-style ground beef wraps, and they showed up whenever ground beef was on sale. Grandma would brown the beef in a skillet, toss in some chili powder, garlic salt, and maybe a spoonful of ketchup or tomato paste, then serve it up inside whatever bread she had around. Sometimes it was a tortilla, sometimes it was plain white sandwich bread folded in half. The seasoning was not store-bought, it was just whatever smelled right. Shredded lettuce, diced onions, or a sprinkle of cheese got added when there was time or leftovers from Sunday. These wraps were messy, fast, and full of flavor. The meat was soft and spicy. The bread was warm and soaked up all the juices. Kids would fold theirs tight and eat it in 2 bites. Adults would eat standing up by the sink, trying not to drop any. This was Tex-Mex before anyone called it that. Comfort food with no instructions and no fuss. Grandma just called it dinner. And somehow, it always hit the spot. Salmon and canned pea toasts were how you made pantry food look halfway fancy when the clock and your energy ran out. You took canned salmon, mashed it with mayonnaise, stirred in some peas, and spread it thick over hot toast. That was dinner. It sounds simple now, but when fresh meat was scarce or paychecks were tight, this was the kind of meal that kept families going. The old cookbooks were filled with little tricks like this, ways to stretch canned goods into something that almost felt special. Salmon from a can never fooled anyone, but the crunch of toast and the soft peas made it oddly satisfying. You might even see a sprinkle of pepper or a squeeze of lemon if someone was feeling bold. It came together fast, filled you up, and for those 10 minutes in the kitchen, it made you feel like you still had control over dinner. Sometimes that is all anyone needed. Rabbit stew was the reward for successful hunting when wild cottontails were plentiful in fields and brush piles. Grandma would joint the rabbit into pieces, brown them in bacon fat, then add water or stock along with whatever vegetables the root cellar provided: potatoes, carrots, onions, turnips. The stew simmered for hours until the rabbit meat turned tender enough to fall from the bone, its mild flavor infusing the broth. She thickened the liquid with a bit of flour mixed with cold water, creating gravy that clung to every piece of meat and vegetable. Wild rabbit was leaner than domestic meat, requiring slow cooking and plenty of fat to keep it from drying out. The stew appeared throughout winter when fresh meat was scarce, but small game remained available to those who knew how to hunt and prepare it. No recipe guided the process. Grandma added vegetables by eye, thickened by feel, seasoned by taste, cooking until her experience told her it was done. Vienna sausage omelet rolls were the quick, clever way families turned pantry food into dinner when the fridge looked bare. You sliced up those little Vienna sausages, tossed them into a hot skillet, and poured whisked eggs right over the top. As the eggs set, you rolled them up like a little omelet wrap, cut it in half if you wanted, and dinner was ready before anyone had time to ask what was cooking. Old cookbooks were filled with recipes like this, fast meals that used up canned staples and turned them into something hot, salty, and filling. You could spoon a little relish on top, serve it with crackers, or keep it plain, but no matter how you fixed it, it hit the spot. Vienna sausages were cheap, easy to store, and lasted forever in the pantry, which made them a go-to when fresh meat was hard to come by. These omelet rolls were not fancy, but they filled you up and got dinner done without much effort. Meals like this stuck around because they worked. They made the most of what little you had, and sometimes that was more than enough. 25 suppers made by women who were too tired to cook and then stood up and cooked anyway. Try one of these this week. Heat up that corned beef hash in a skillet until the bottom turns black and crispy. Fry a piece of Spam the way your grandmother did on a Wednesday night when the groceries had run thin. Spread pimento cheese on white bread and eat it standing at the counter without a single explanation. And when you sit down to eat it, remember that the woman who first put it in front of you was not being lazy. She was keeping you fed when she had nothing left to give. If this list brought back a meal you have not thought about in years, share this video with someone who would remember it too. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, and I will see you in the next one.